Monterey City was the kind of place that gleamed even in the shadows. Nestled along the coast, it hummed with quiet money, the type of wealth that never had to prove itself. Bentleys glided past palm trees. Perfume boutiques smelled like secrets. And in the heart of it all sat Wexford Avenue, a strip of elite stores that sparkled like polished teeth. Everything was crisp, curated, and expensive. If you didn't belong, you could feel it before anyone said a word. At 2:13 p.m., a woman stepped onto the marble floor of Rose Hall and Sage, the most exclusive beauty atelier in the district. She didn't look like someone trying to be noticed. No loud colors, no heels that echoed, no camera clicks in her wake, just soft-soled flats and a perfectly tailored oatmeal sweater dress. Her name was Lena Morgan, and when Lena walked, it was like the world should already know her path. But they didn't. Not here. To the staff inside Rose Hall and Sage, she was another woman of color, walking alone. She didn't come draped in designer labels or flash a titanium credit card. She didn't have a known last name, not to them. They assumed she was just browsing, just looking, just taking up space. What they didn't see was that Lena wasn't just a visitor. She was here for a product that had been especially ordered for her. A rare skincare line flown in from France, paid in full weeks ago. She needed it for the gala. She herself had organized a high-society charity dinner priced at $50,000 a plate. But that wasn't what anyone in the store saw. Instead, they watched her like she was a question they didn't want to answer. A white woman who entered moments after her was greeted with champagne and a warm smile. Another was led straight into a private consultation suite. Lena, meanwhile, walked among the displays unnoticed, or worse, too noticed. Then came the voice. "This isn't a museum," said a man, his tone dry and deliberate. He was tall, stiff-backed, with a pinched mouth. Thomas Reed, the boutique's general manager, didn't bother to lower his voice. It cut across the store like a slap. "If you're not purchasing anything," he added, "I'll have to ask you to leave." Lena turned slowly, her hands still resting on a display of imported face oils. Her expression was unreadable. The face of someone used to being misread. "I wasn't aware browsing was a crime," she said. Calm as ice under silk. Thomas didn't blink. "We've had issues with people wasting time," he said, eyes narrowing. "And some guests make others uncomfortable." There it was. The message he didn't say out loud, but that every cell in the room had already heard. Lena didn't respond. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was seasoned. The kind of silence that came from experience, from generations of being seen as less. She knew this moment before it began, and she knew it would echo far beyond these walls. Thomas took her silence as weakness. He raised his voice. "We reserve the right to refuse service." He wasn't just talking to her now, he was performing, speaking loud enough for the other shoppers to hear, for the security cameras, for the brand's image. Several heads turned. A young associate near the front window froze. Her eyes darted from Lena to Thomas like she'd just witnessed lightning strike too close. Security arrived before Lena could say another word. Two tall men in matching suits. Earpieces in. No questions. No gentle tone. They stood on either side of her like she was some kind of threat. Lena didn't resist. She walked with them, past the lip-glossed smiles, past the wall of perfume bottles, past the silence of those who had watched it all happen and said nothing. As the glass doors opened and the sun poured in, she paused. Just for a second. Then she turned. Not with tears, not with rage, with a stillness that shook more than any shout could have. She looked back at Thomas, not as a victim, not even as a challenger, but as a woman who had just let a man hang himself, with his own rope. "You've made a mistake." That's what her silence said. To onlookers, she was just another customer asked to leave. Maybe she didn't follow the rules. Maybe she wandered where she shouldn't have. That's the story Thomas would later tell the corporate office. The story he'd smile about in staff meetings, the version that painted him as professional, calm, even heroic. But none of them knew who she was, not even close. Because Lena Morgan wasn't just any customer. She was married to Daniel Morgan, one of the most powerful tech moguls in the world. A man whose software was used by half the Fortune 500. A man who once bought a competitor mid-flight. A man whose calls were taken before presidents. And Lena? She wasn't just his wife. She was the soul of their empire. She organized their foundation galas, negotiated with foreign ministers, and had sat in rooms where men flinched under her calm. This trip to Rose Hall and Sage? It wasn't her first time there. She had been one of their top clients for years. But they didn't check names. They didn't bother to look up her appointment. They just saw a quiet black woman without designer bags and assumed she didn't belong. The sun glared down on Wexford Avenue, bouncing off polished windshields and spotless, boutique windows. But Lena Morgan didn't feel its warmth. As she walked out of Rose Hall and Sage, the most elite beauty house in Monterey City, her shadow stretched long behind her, silent and heavy. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. But inside her chest, something had cracked wide open. The street outside was just as busy as when she walked in. Cars glided by, humming like the world had already moved on. A couple passed her laughing, hands full of designer bags. Somewhere, a small dog barked from a stroller. But in Lena's ears, there was only the echo of Thomas Reed's voice. Cold, dismissive, full of the kind of arrogance that pretends to be policy. "This isn't a museum." She clenched her jaw and walked faster. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because pain had taught her long ago that tears were a luxury. People like her weren't always allowed to display, especially not in public. She reached her car, a sleek, quiet sedan parked under a jacaranda tree. As she opened the door, her hand trembled just slightly. Inside, the leather was warm from the sun. She sank into the seat, closed the door, and sat still. The air conditioning hummed, whispering over her skin. But nothing cooled the fire in her chest. Then she reached for her handbag. It was a structured leather tote in soft ash brown, elegant, understated, expensive. From it, she pulled her phone. Her fingers moved on instinct. One name, one call. Daniel. Her husband answered on the second ring. Not with a cheerful, "Hey, babe," or a distracted, "What's up?" No. Daniel Morgan picked up the call like a man who already knew something had gone wrong. His voice was steady but serious. "Lena?" She swallowed. "You won't believe what just happened." Her voice was low, controlled, but too calm. The kind of calm that Daniel recognized immediately. He knew his wife. He had built a world with her. And he knew that when Lena spoke like this, so measured, so cold, it meant the ground had shifted. "Tell me," he said. Just that, and she did. From the moment she stepped into the store to the moment she was walked out like an intruder, every detail, every look, every silence. She told him about the champagne being poured for other guests, about the private suite offered to someone who walked in after her, about being followed, ignored, and then told to leave. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't say the words racism or bias. She didn't have to. Daniel understood. He didn't interrupt, not even once. He listened like a man taking notes in a courtroom. Every pause, every word, every emotion between the lines. When she finished, there was a stillness on the line. Not awkward, not confused, but the kind of silence that comes just before something starts. Like a breath. Before a storm. Then Daniel spoke. "Come home." 2 simple words. But Lena felt the shift in them. This wasn't over, and Daniel, he wasn't going to let it be. The city outside their penthouse was already asleep, but inside the walls of the Morgan residence, a quiet storm had started to gather. The moment Lena had placed her phone down, Daniel Morgan stood with his jaw set like stone. He didn't shout. He didn't pace the room or punch the air like a man out for blood. Instead, he walked calmly into his study, clicked on his desk lamp, and pulled his laptop toward him. The light hit his eyes like fire sharpening steel. To the world, Daniel was known as a visionary, a builder of things, the kind of man who saw patterns where others saw puzzles. And tonight, he was a man on a mission, not for revenge, for something cleaner, more permanent. He didn't need a scandal, he needed ownership. And so, while the rest of Monterey City slept, Daniel got to work. By 11:30 p.m., his most trusted advisors were on encrypted calls. Screens glowed in dark rooms across time zones. A team that usually discussed future technologies now turned their attention to a different kind of system, the one hiding behind glossy makeup counters and velvet drapes. Granvia Collective, that was the name Daniel's legal aid whispered after an hour of digging. The parent company, the puppet master, the empire behind Rose Hall and Sage. On paper, it was clean, a polished collection of global luxury brands, stockholders, and asset charts. But behind the glitter and glass, it was built on an old foundation, one that decided who belonged in a room before they even stepped into it. Daniel's eyes scanned the report. Granvia wasn't just a brand engine. It was a gatekeeper, a machine of quiet exclusion, built over decades and draped in the language of refinement. That meant one thing to Daniel. It was ripe for disruption. He didn't write a press statement. He didn't call a lawyer to draft a threat. No. He placed a call to a different department, the one that handled acquisitions. Within hours, anonymous bids began to move through shell corporations and trusted intermediaries. Daniel's fingerprints were invisible. His name never appeared. But his reach, that was unmistakable. He didn't just want to buy Rose Hall and Sage. He wanted to buy the table it sat at, the shareholders, the influence, the boardroom seats, all of it. It wasn't emotional, it was mathematical. Every deal, every share, every agreement was placed like a piece on a chessboard. While the world dreamed peacefully beneath their blankets, Daniel bought silence. He bought leverage. He bought access. And by the time the sky turned soft with morning light, he had done it. He wasn't just a billionaire with a bruised ego. He was now the majority owner of Granvia Collective, the very company that had tried to humiliate his wife. But Lena Morgan? She didn't want a headline. She wasn't looking for a scandal with her face on it. At sunrise, she stood barefoot in her robe, hands wrapped around a warm mug of green tea, staring out over the city. She hadn't slept, not from anger, but from thought. The breeze touched her skin. Her eyes drifted down toward the street where Rose Hall and Sage sat in its usual quiet pride. From here, it looked small, almost meaningless. And yet, what had happened inside those marble walls, it wasn't rare. It was common. It was just the first time someone with power had caught it in the light. She closed her eyes. This wasn't just about her. She thought about the women who walked into places like that every day and were told with silence that they didn't belong. The young girls who learned early to whisper in fancy stores. The mothers who saved up for something beautiful, only to be met with suspicion. The professionals who carried titles, degrees, whole histories behind them, yet got treated like shadows. This wasn't just about fixing one store. It was about making sure it never happened again. Not like that. Not to anyone. Daniel came to her side. He didn't say, "We did it," because he knew, for Lena, ownership was only the first step. She looked up at him and asked softly, How many other stores do they own? He raised his brow. Too many, she nodded. Then we're not done. Firing Thomas Reed and the smug store manager would be easy. Too easy. He'd become a scapegoat. An Instagram apology. We take this seriously statement from corporate. But that wasn't what Lena wanted. She didn't want a face to blame. She wanted the entire system to feel uncomfortable. She wanted to uproot the thinking that allowed it to happen in the first place. So, while Daniel secured shares and influence, Lena began to design the future. Not with spreadsheets or boardroom charts, but with stories, with colors, with soul. She sat at her drafting table and opened a fresh sketch pad. She didn't just design products. She imagined spaces. What would it feel? Like to walk into a place that truly welcomed you? What would the air smell like? What would you hear? What if luxury didn't feel cold and sterile, but warm, earthy, alive? She called in her first meetings, not with brand consultants, but with artists. Black women who painted with history in their fingertips. Queer stylists who understood the language of bold beauty. Indigenous makers who crafted stories into fabric. Designers with disabilities who had long created brilliance in silence. She brought them to the table, not as tokens, but as leaders. Lena believed something radical. That elegance didn't have to exclude. That beauty wasn't just for those with gold cards and last names you had to Google. She wasn't trying to patch Rose Hall and Sage. She was preparing to build something new, something that couldn't be undone with a PR post or a new marketing slogan. She wasn't building a brand, she was planting a movement. Every evening, while Daniel worked on policy, Lena built culture. She designed floor plans that allowed natural light to fall gently on every product. She scrapped stiff couches and replaced them with soft communal seating, where women could sit without feeling watched. She created scent profiles based on Black-owned perfumers, soft notes of hibiscus, sandalwood, and rain. She replaced white-tiled silence with music, soft jazz, Afro beats, the hum of something real. She didn't want stores that whispered, "You're lucky to be here." She wanted them to say, "We've been waiting for you." And through all this, Lena didn't post. She didn't tweet. She didn't take a selfie in the boardroom with the caption, "Change in progress." She stayed quiet, not because she was hiding, but because she knew something most people didn't. True power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't seek applause. It doesn't beg to be seen. It reshapes the room. By the end of the first week, her sketches had turned into blueprints. Her ideas had turned into teams, and the people once pushed aside by the industry, they weren't knocking on the door anymore. They were walking through it. The staff at Rose Hall and Sage had returned to their routines, sipping coffee and adjusting perfume displays like nothing had happened. To them, the tension from the previous week had already dissolved into gossip. Thomas Reed, the store manager, strutted from counter to counter with a smugness that was difficult to ignore. His voice, once low and clipped, now carried across the showroom floor. He'd handled the situation after all. A so-called incident with a difficult customer who didn't know her place. That was how he framed it in meetings. "People like her never really belong here," he told a junior stylist with a dismissive wave, his cologne trailing behind him like a mask. No one corrected him. Outside, the California sun painted gold across the boutique's polished windows. Inside, beneath the surface, something rotten festered. A culture of polished exclusion, perfumed discrimination, hidden behind smiles and designer labels. But Thomas didn't see it. And that would be his downfall. Lena Morgan hadn't disappeared. She had been waiting. Not in anger, but in focus. She had chosen stillness over spectacle. While the world moved on, she was watching, listening, choosing the hour her silence would end. This wasn't about revenge. This was about restoration. Because sometimes storms don't begin with thunder. They begin with a single breath. That breath came at 9:58 a.m. on a Thursday morning. The street outside Rose Hall and Sage's flagship store on Stanton Row was just beginning to hum. Delivery trucks wheezed past, luxury shoppers sipped their lattes, and inside the boutique, not one staff member sensed the shift approaching. The boutique was glowing, but the storm was seconds away. The front doors opened with a soft click, not a bang. No music, no announcement, just a presence. Lena stepped in wearing a dove-gray pantsuit that kissed her curves with quiet power. Her heels made no sound, but her steps commanded silence. Her hair was swept into a low, neat bun. No jewelry. No badge, no press. Just a slim leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm and the composed posture of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Eyes turned. Air thickened. The room slowed. The empire that had once asked her to leave now had no choice but to receive. Her right behind her walked Daniel Morgan in a navy suit tailored to perfection, yet it was clear. This was not his moment. He let Lena lead. This was her story. This was her reckoning. Behind Daniel came 2 legal advisors from Morgan Enterprises, followed by 3 members of the Granvia Collective Board, the very group that now controlled the fate of Rose Hall and Sage. At the rear stood a woman dressed in a smart rust-orange blouse and tortoise-rimmed glasses. Her name was Dr. Abini Cole, a cultural strategist and educator. Just 3 days earlier, Lena had appointed her the chief inclusion officer of the entire luxury group. She wasn't here to watch. She was here to begin. The boutique's golden glow turned cold. A stillness crept over the room like a shadow. One sales associate dropped a makeup brush without noticing. A champagne flute clicked against the edge of a glass tray. A murmur stopped mid-breath. Thomas Reed, still grinning, turned from the consultation desk. He didn't register it at first, just another group of high-level visitors. But then his eyes locked with Lena's, and the temperature behind his forehead dropped 10 degrees. First confusion, then disbelief, then panic. Before Thomas could speak, a man from Daniel's legal team stepped forward and handed him a sealed white envelope. The boutique had fallen into absolute silence. "For you," the man said evenly. Thomas blinked. What is this?" He tore the seal with trembling fingers. His lips moved as he read the first line. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as store manager for Rose Hall and Sage." Gasps rippled through the showroom. Staff glanced at one another. Customers paused mid-browse. "You can't be serious." Thomas's voice cracked. "What is this? Who are you people?" Daniel Morgan stepped forward. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. "You remember my wife, don't you?" he asked, motioning gently toward Lena but keeping his eyes on Thomas. "She came here 6 days ago. You escorted her out. No recognition, no check, no conversation. Just assumption, just force." Thomas's mouth opened, but no sound came. He saw it now. The woman he had dismissed, shooed, embarrassed, was not just anyone. She was Lena Morgan. And the people behind her weren't guests. They were the new architects of his future. "You didn't care who she was," Daniel said. "That's the problem." Lena still hadn't said a word, not because she had nothing to say, but because silence was still her sharpest blade. Her stillness filled the room, commanding more attention than any shouting match ever could. The aura around her had changed the rhythm of the entire space. Thomas tried to stammer something. "It was a mistake. I thought—" Daniel cut him off. "You didn't think. You assumed. And that's how systems like this survive. On small, quiet acts of erasure." Dr. Abini Cole stepped forward now, her clipboard in hand, her tone firm but measured. "We are initiating a full operational review of this location and others under the Granvia Collective umbrella. You've been relieved of duty, Mr. Thomas. HR will follow up. Thomas dropped the envelope. This can't be legal. Lena finally turned her head toward him and spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. You made sure I felt small, she said, looking him in the eyes. But you forgot something. I wasn't alone. I never was. She took a step closer. You didn't see me. Not truly. You saw a version of me that you were trained to mistrust. One that you've ignored all your life. And because of that, you tried to take something from me. My right to belong. My right to be seen. My dignity. Her words sliced, not with rage, but with clarity. Now you've lost something too. She didn't blink. And I'm not here to celebrate that. I'm here to rebuild what you helped rot. Thomas turned, trembling, as security staff quietly approached from the back hallway. No, one moved to stop them. He was escorted out of the store he once ruled. Not with cameras flashing, not with shouts, but with the shame of knowing he had underestimated the wrong woman. A customer near the skincare shelf whispered, "That's her." Lena ignored it. She turned toward the staff, all eyes on her now. Some afraid, some ashamed. One young woman, the only black associate on the floor, lowered her eyes. But Lena didn't judge her. She understood the silence. She had lived it too. The message had landed. The room had been rewritten. This was no longer Thomas Reed's Rose Hall and Sage. This was the beginning of legacy. I didn't mean... Thomas Reed's voice trembled, thin and desperate. But Lena Morgan didn't let him finish. You did, she said softly. Her voice was calm but firm, like silk wrapped around steel. Every word, every look, every action, you meant it. You meant to embarrass me. You meant to shrink me, because I didn't look like someone you believed belonged here. She didn't yell. There was no fury in her tone, only truth. And that truth cut deeper than any outburst ever could. Daniel Morgan turned his gaze to the rest of the staff. His voice, low but unwavering, filled the room. This isn't just about one man, he said. It's about a pattern, a system. One that has lived comfortably for far too long, built on assumptions and silence. One that told my wife she didn't belong while serving champagne to others with rehearsed smiles. Across the room, a young black saleswoman lowered her eyes. She had seen it happen. She had said nothing, not because she agreed, but because silence had been woven into her survival. Dr. Abeni Cole stepped forward now, clipboard in hand. She adjusted her glasses, then spoke clearly. Starting today, she announced, Rose Hall and Sage no longer operates under its old name or leadership. Effective immediately, all locations will transition under the Granvia Collective's new directive. That includes full retraining on cultural sensitivity, ethical sales conduct, and dismantling implicit bias. She paused, then added, and there will be audits, deep, sweeping audits. Her eyes swept the staff. If any of this makes you uncomfortable, you are welcome to leave now. Not a single person moved. But the tension crackled like thunder in a clear sky. Lena stepped forward, quietly. She opened her leather portfolio and placed it gently on the glass counter. The room watched in stillness. Inside were photos, emails, receipts, screenshots, testimonies, documents from former employees, people who had left quietly after being dismissed, ignored, pushed out. Each piece was evidence, not of one bad moment, but of a hidden culture, one rotting beneath glossy surfaces. There are stories in here, Lena said, looking around. Each one started just like mine. A person of color walked in, and before they said a word, they were told, with posture, with silence, with policy, "You do not belong here." She paused, her voice softening. But they do. She glanced toward the fragrance aisle. A customer who had been quietly filming wiped a tear from her cheek. Her hand trembled as she lowered her phone. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a reckoning. Outside, the city moved on. Buses sighed, taxis honked, tourists wandered past. But inside the walls of Rose Hall and Sage, the world was shifting. A revolution had begun, not with fire or shouting, but with paper, presence, and truth. Thomas Reed had long since stopped speaking. Stood alone, shoulders slumped, his name badge suddenly meaningless. There was no press, no viral moment. Just a quiet end to a loud arrogance. Security approached gently. He didn't argue. He simply walked toward the door he once controlled, now powerless beneath the weight of his own choices. As the doors clicked shut behind him, Lena let out a long breath, not of relief, but of resolve. She turned to the staff and spoke for the first time to all of them. "This place told me I didn't belong," she said. "And today, I'm telling you, I do. We do. From this moment on, that door doesn't open based on skin or status. It opens based on humanity." Silence held the room. Then came a shift. The young black saleswoman who had stayed silent before stepped forward. Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "I saw what happened," she whispered. "I should have spoken up. I didn't. But I want to now. I want to stay. I want to be part of this." Lena nodded, her expression softening. "Then you're part of the change," she said. Daniel placed his hand on his wife's back, and together, they turned toward the door. Outside, the world buzzed as usual. But inside, something had rooted itself. Something that would grow far beyond that store. The quiet storm had passed, but its echo had just begun. Lena Morgan didn't step back into the boardrooms of Rose Hall and Sage seeking revenge. She stepped in with blueprints, while headlines buzzed with rumors, calling her and Daniel the billionaire couple who brought down a beauty empire. The real conversations inside their San Francisco penthouse were much quieter, much deeper. One evening, Daniel stood at the window, staring out at the glittering skyline. "We can destroy it all," he said, voice low. "But then what's left?" Barefoot, Lena joined him on the balcony. She looked out at the same city that once celebrated her, then tried to erase her. "We don't tear it down," she replied. "We build something better." That's when Ember & Co. was born. It wasn't just a rebranding, it was a declaration, a reshaping of what luxury meant. Not icy perfection, but soulful presence. Lena knew what the industry had ignored for too long. Exclusivity didn't need to mean exclusion. Prestige didn't vanish with diversity. People didn't want to be impressed. They wanted to be acknowledged. The sterile white walls of the old stores were the first to go. In their place came warmth, deep earth tones, soft textures, walls that whispered welcome. Displays were no longer just product stands. They were storytelling spaces. Hanging on those walls were portraits of black creators, indigenous makers, disabled artists, the unseen architects of beauty. Hiring changed, too. Lena didn't want polished resumes filled with fancy brand names. She wanted heart, empathy, real stories. Every applicant was interviewed not just for skill, but for spirit. "What does respect look like to you?" she asked each one personally. "Tell me about a time you made someone feel like they belonged." These weren't checklist questions. They were roots, because she knew a company could only thrive if it was built by people who believed in its soul. Even the training was transformed. No longer was it about memorizing products and scripts. Now, employees learned the buried history of the beauty world, how colorism shaped makeup lines, how microaggressions lived in posture and tone. They practiced not perfection, but presence. And from that soil, something real began to grow. They didn't train for perfection, they trained for compassion. Each new hire practiced handling hard moments, standing in uncomfortable truths, and learning how to show up for others with dignity. Every session ended with a single question. What will you do in this role to help someone feel seen? Legacy's shelves began to reflect a new kind of pride. Under Lena's careful curation, the product lines blended science with soul. Ancestral beauty secrets were reborn in lab-tested formulas. Green tea toners from Korea, baobab root masks from East Africa, hibiscus balms from Caribbean gardens. She didn't just showcase innovation, she honored heritage. Then came the New Makers Grant, a program created by Lena and funded by Daniel. It gave Black, brown, and indigenous creators a chance to rise. Young formulators, fragrance crafters, and beauty visionaries were finally given access. You shouldn't need to be famous or rich, Lena said, to see your brilliance on these shelves. Within weeks, the response was overwhelming. More than 4,000 applications poured in. Daniel, ever the architect behind the curtain, made sure Legacy's ideals weren't just glossy surface dreams. He rebuilt their entire supply chain, prioritizing small batch makers and ethical sourcing. He introduced a shared profit model to reward businesses for inclusive practices, and he created a feedback system where customers could anonymously report praise, concern, or bias. If we say we care, Daniel said during a staff summit, then the systems we build must show that. 6 months after Lena had been cast out of Aurora Lux's flagship store, the first Legacy store opened its doors, in the exact same location. But this time, the crowd outside didn't look elite. They looked human. Young creators, immigrant, mothers, professors in denim jackets, children clinging to their fathers' hands. People who had once been ignored or eyed suspiciously now stood ready to enter, not as guests, but as family. Inside, Lena stood by the welcome desk, not on a stage, not giving a speech, just there, present, watching as each visitor crossed the threshold. One woman with silver braids and tears in her eyes stopped and whispered, "You didn't just build a store, you built a safe place." Reporters flooded in, asking Lena if this was a story of revenge. She never said yes, she never said no either. But in one quiet interview, she offered a single answer. People expected us to tear down walls just to prove a point. But if you tear something down without building something better, who wins? Legacy isn't revenge. It's restoration. It's about creating a space where nobody has to shrink to be welcomed. The store flourished. Word spread quickly. Not because of flashy ads, but because people felt seen. Mothers returned with daughters. Influencers posted not just selfies, but paragraphs about how they felt walking inside. Formerly sidelined communities became legacies. Most passionate ambassadors, even former Aurora Lux employees reached out. Some came to apologize. Others asked to work at Legacy. Lena welcomed the ones willing to grow. "This isn't about getting it perfect," she told them. "It's about showing up, differently, truthfully." By the end of their first quarter, Legacy had outpaced Aurora Lux's best year by nearly 30%. But the numbers weren't what thrilled Lena or Daniel. The real victory came in smaller, quieter moments. Like the one time a young black girl walked in, picked up a deep plum lipstick, and tried it without glancing over her shoulder. That was the reason they built it. Not to reclaim power, but to give it away. Legacy redefined value. Worth wasn't tied to accents, status, or shade. Dignity walked beside every customer, every staff member, every product on the shelf. The luxury empire that once excluded had collapsed, and in its place, something priceless had risen. The world didn't transform overnight, but something began to shift the morning the second Legacy store opened, this time in Atlanta. A city stitched together with black brilliance, cultural memory, and generational fire. Lena stood just beyond the threshold, a quiet smile playing at her lips as people stepped inside. Nobody rushed. They walked slowly, curiously. Some paused at the portraits of forgotten beauty pioneers on the walls. Others inhaled the soft scent of lavender and cedarwood woven into the air. A woman in a floral dress mouthed the words, "Thank you," as she brushed past Lena. No sound, just a look that said everything. There was no ribbon cutting, no speeches, just footsteps, just belonging. Daniel stood beside her, dressed in a charcoal suit, eyes on the crowd, but hand in hers. The past was behind them. The moment was now. Each new legacy store opened not for prestige, but for purpose. Neighborhood by neighborhood, Lena chose locations where stories already lived. Harlem, South Central, Bronzeville. The walls bore local art. The shelves offered goods made by local hands. The staff spoke the neighborhood's rhythm. Lena refused. To bring legacy to a community, she built it with them. Every month, she hosted community sessions in each location. No VIP tickets, no corporate jargon. The room would fill with barbers, teachers, young designers, aunties, kids with sketchbooks and dreams. "What do you need from us?" she'd ask, and then she'd listen. Lena stood inside yet another new store, this one nestled in the heart of Detroit, a city whose spirit matched her own. The space buzzed softly with the hum of fresh beginnings. It was here, years ago, that her mother had once scrubbed office floors beneath flickering lights while dreaming that her daughter might one day own the rooms she cleaned. Now, Lena stood tall, her presence the very definition of grace, power, and promise. This was luxury. Not the marble or mirrors, not the scents or fabrics, but the people, the possibility, the wide-open doors. Lena's journey wasn't just a tale of resilience. It was a declaration. A woman once pushed out of a boutique simply for existing had risen, not with fury, but with quiet conviction. Her story reminded the world that dignity doesn't need permission to walk in. It walks in anyway. From the moment she was cast out of Elysium Beauty, all she had wanted was to be treated fairly. Not praised, not pitied, just seen for who she was. But instead of recognition, she met suspicion. Instead of kindness, she was met with silent scorn. Her soft-spoken elegance was misunderstood as lacking, and for a moment she was made to feel small. But that moment did not define her. It ignited her. With Daniel, her husband, her partner, the quiet mastermind behind one of the world's most powerful tech empires, she channeled that pain into purpose. Together, they didn't throw tantrums or wage public battles. They made plans. They moved with strategy. They bought the very walls that once tried to shut her out. In doing so, Lena and Daniel didn't just strip a bigot of his title. They pulled the curtain back on a culture of exclusion and held a mirror to an entire industry. Through it all, Lena remained calm, never once using her influence to demand validation. Her strength was in her stillness, her refusal to be shaped by prejudice. She knew her worth, and soon the world would know it too. But her greatest act wasn't in tearing down what was broken. It was in building what was missing. Legacy. Born not from anger but from vision, legacy wasn't a rebrand. It was a redefinition, a revolution wrapped in elegance. Lena didn't just open doors, she widened them. She didn't just invite others in, she handed them the keys. From Atlanta to Harlem, in every corner of the brand, legacy breathed a new kind of excellence. It welcomed what the world had too often ignored: diversity, culture, truth. It created space where once there had only been silence. Every scholarship granted, every face hired, every story displayed on the walls of her stores became a brick in a bridge toward a future more just and more human. And Lena, she stood there, unwavering. A woman once underestimated, now a lighthouse for the unseen. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She let her purpose echo. Because real power isn't loud. It's enduring. It's the soft hand holding a door open. It's the quiet voice that says, "Come in. You belong here too." That was Lena's legacy, and it was just the beginning. Let your actions echo louder than words. Let your purpose blaze a trail. You don't always have to strike back with force. Sometimes you counter fire with vision. In a world quick to judge based on skin or silence, remember this. Your value isn't up for discussion, and your legacy isn't shaped by those who overlook you. It's sculpted by how you rise, how you create, and how you stand when others expect you to fall. So, what does that mean for today? If you've ever been overlooked at your job, if you've ever felt invisible in a room full of voices, if you've ever questioned whether a place was truly meant for you, think of Lena's path. Hold on to your truth. Let your frustration become fuel. Let your stillness become strategy. Speak with purpose, move with intention. You were never misplaced in those rooms. You were the shift waiting to happen. And most importantly, never allow anyone to decide where your presence is permitted. If this story lit something inside you, if it made you feel seen, understood, or empowered, consider subscribing to this channel. Your presence helps us keep telling stories like Lena's, stories that push through silence, spark reflection, and hold up a mirror to truth. Stories that say, "We are here and we matter." Thank you for walking with us. There's so much more ahead, and you'll want to be part of every moment.